Carbo loading is a nutritional strategy to increase the glycogen stored in the body above its normal amount before exercise in order to make sure that there will be enough of this energy stored to use. It particularly involves a depletion in carbohydrates about a week before the event in order for the body to become aware for the great need of glycogen after its deprivation, and then about 3 days before, eating more carbs than usual while also decreasing exercise to reduce the amount of carbs you're using, um, ready for like a marathon. Recovery is the very crucial period after which exercise has occurred. One reason the body needs recovery time from any specific type of exercise is in order to for the body systems to be restored back to a resting level after they've been maximised due to exercise activity. Recovery is important as it gives the body an opportunity to restore energy stores such as ATP, which have depleted due to the usage of them during the exercise. There are different stages of the store's recovery. First of all, ATP is replenished, then PC stores are replenished also. Now lactic acid is removed from the muscles, which is important after any event, which particularly has a large ADP build up because it can cause physical pain after. Next, MB is replenished, which is followed by the replenishment of glycogen stores which were lost during exercise. Another reason that there is recovery period after exercise is for the body to prepare to be repaired from damage due to training and activity. Recovery allows the body to regulate back to normal levels after specifically submaximal intensity exercises and long duration. For example, after a marathon, the body will feel physically drained due to its long duration nature. Most of the energy stores will have been used up, and occasionally towards the end, some athletes will be close to hitting the wall when they run out of glycogen stores. Furthermore, physically, the body will be strained with potential muscle damage, in which can be particularly partially recovered by massages and cool down stretches, which I'll talk about further on in my presentation. Different exercises will have different requirements from the recovery period, as some types are more physically demanding than others. A short duration exercise such as javelin or shot puts will have less intense and shorter recovery periods due to the lower likelihood for physical damage and higher energy stores lost because the duration is shorter. The recovery intensity and period will be smaller compared to a large cycle race, which is highly demanding and will cause deprivation in many stores and occasionally physical muscle damage. The oxygen deficit exists when a body's consumption of oxygen exceeds its intake. An oxygen deficit is a natural occurrence during strenuous exercise. It is the sum of the minute difference between the measured oxygen uptake and the oxygen uptake occurring during steady state active and exercise at the same rate. When exercise triggers an oxygen deficit, the body will work to replenish oxygen levels during what is known as a recovery period. It shows a temporary shortage of oxygen during exercise. This amount varies in different exercise types. For those which require a lot of oxygen, such as a marathon, for a long amount of time, this will be higher compared to those which use the lactic acid stores, such as a 400-meter sprint, as it doesn't require oxygen, so the value will be lower anyway. Unless there is 100% any contribution of the aerobic system, there is a shortage of oxygen, and the graph shows this. VO2 is sufficient for the demand of activity. As seen in the graph of the oxygen deficit, there is a smaller shortage of oxygen for submaximal exercise compared to the maximal, which uses large bursts of energy, so therefore has a larger oxygen deficit. EPOC stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It shows the extra oxygen consumption which happens during exercise. It's a measurably increased rate of oxygen intake following strenuous activity. Maximal intensity shows how there is a higher and larger excess oxygen consumption after exercise compared to submaximal. This is because there's been a more energy stores lost to the lack of oxygen, so therefore this recovery period will need to restore them, and the body needs to take in more oxygen urgently. For submaximal intensity exercise, there is a smaller oxygen deficit. It is mainly steady state exercise involved here, so mostly aerobic respiration is used, which means that there's less lactic acid produced, and there is a quicker recovery period because there is less VO2 consumed. In contrast, seen on the right here, for maximal intensity exercise, there is a larger oxygen deficit. It's not steady state, so therefore it's more like an anaerobic respiratory store used, which means that there's more lactic acid buildup and a larger EPOC, which you can see in the end bit, due to the VO2 consumption and recovery, and there's a slower recovery here. A lactic fast recovery focuses on MBB, HB, ATP, and PC, which are very important stores in the body, and some of which will have been lost first, so they need to be recovered as soon as. So, just to summarize that, the VO2 is consumed to resaturate myoglobin with oxygen. It's used for resaturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, resynthesis of ATP stores, and it resynthesizes PC stores. There are also stores which are by the lactic acid slow recovery. These are lactic acid stores which are removed. 65% of lactic acid is converted into pyruvate and it enters the Krebs, and then is finally converted into carbon dioxide and water. 5% of lactic acid is converted to glucose in the Cori cycle and is entered into the liver, and this happens there. 20% of lactic acid converts to glycogen in the Cori cycle in the liver and is stored in the muscles and the liver, and 10% of lactic acid is converted into protein for the body. CO2 is removed also in this removal of recovery. So 70% is carried in the plasma as carbonic acid. This carbon dioxide combines with the water there. 23% is carried by the hemoglobin as calm hemoglobin, and then 3% is dissolved in the plasma of the blood. Water can be physically renewed by drinking a lot of it after the event in order to replace that loss from sweating, and glycogen is in less demand after exercise, but that will be built up again by eating glucose-rich food after the event. Glycogen high carbohydrate diet will speed up the glycogen recovery process. Muscle cells are most receptive to carbohydrate during the first 2 hours after the training or activity session. In order to accelerate the recovery, it's important to consume around 300 to 400 calories of carbohydrates shortly after the training session, and another 300 to 400 within 2 hours. For example, a high CHO loaded drink could be needed immediately after the exercise. This graph shows the VO2 before, during, and after exercise. E shows the oxygen deficit. As you can see, the difference between oxygen intake in the body during early stages of exercise, when it increases rapidly, and during a similar duration in the same steady state exercise. C is showing the oxygen consumption during exercise. Once exercise has begun, the oxygen consumption is being low 1 VO2. However, it rapidly increases in order to match the demands of the activity and muscle needs for oxygen. As seen in A, it's the epoch fast replenishment in which excess post-exercise oxygen consumption happens. It shows that although the exercise has ended, there is still oxygen consumption in order to replace that which was lost. There are metabolic needs which the body requires, and they are the extra VO2 consumed after exercise by organs such as your heart and muscles like your respiratory muscles. The heart muscles need oxygen to sustain the heart rate and SV, which is stroke volume. Respiratory muscles require additional oxygen for breathing rate and tidal volume, which all equals the overall intake of oxygen. Metabolic needs are regulated by the body's heart rate and breathing rate. With a steady but fast breathing rate, oxygen intake will increase and some of the CO2 produced by the muscles will be removed through the lungs and out through exhalation. The graph shows that at least at rest, the breathing rate and heart rate are both reasonably low. This is because the body doesn't require a lot of oxygen delivery to the muscles because there isn't a large energy requirement at rest. So they both begin at around 73 to 74 rates per minute. However, when exercise begins, there is an increase in rate from both values. However, heart rate does happen at a larger rate due to it being a stronger and a main transport system of oxygen to the muscles. Breathing rates help with supplying the oxygen to the lungs, but the heart rate is responsible for propelling the oxygen in where it is needed to make oxygen in the muscles and in order for them to contract. At maximum, the heart rate exercise there will be around 190, and finally after exercise in the recovery period both rates decrease. However, they do this slowly, so any lost energy store such as ATP can be renewed. In a sprinting race, the heart may be much higher than during a marathon because there is a faster pace for a shorter amount of time, so the heart will need to pump faster in order to supply the muscles with this large amount of energy it requires. The breathing rate may have a higher value compared to the marathon runner because their breaths are more shallow and rapid than the deeper breaths in which are required by marathon runners to simply to supply a good amount of oxygen to the muscles and body for a long amount of time, because it also runs out quicker due to the intense duration. This is a graph which shows a recovery summary just of the different stages, the times in which that it takes for it to use, the amount of oxygen used, and then what each of them are for. So it shows the alactacid stage and the lactacid stage, and it shows that they're around the similar. No, lactacid takes a lot longer to work, and it uses more oxygen. DOM stands for delayed onset muscle soreness. It's the pain and stiffness which athletes feel in the muscles several hours to days after strenuous exercise. The soreness is felt most strongly 24 to 72 hours after exercise, and it is the burning sensation and the lack of flexibility you'll experience after. The lowering of the blood's pH during intense exercise, which is caused by the build-up of hydrogen ions, will make it acidic, which causes the pain, which is sensed by pain receptors. Active recovery allows active muscle to be flushed with oxygenated blood, which reduces the effect of lactate and speeds up recovery. The muscle soreness felt the days after the exercise can be caused through injury to muscles and connective tissues after the exercise, which can be which can be